another Pepys guy. Randy, come on up. Glad to have you.
I do want to apologize also. This is the first time I've done anything on the Kentucky book. I know the newsletter and everything was sent out said Mississippi's battlefields, but I've spoken on that before here, so I do want to apologize. The new book is actually entitled Kentucky Civil War Battlefields. What I've done on those is to conduct an overview of all the major battles in the state, and also to look at the level of preservation or lack thereof that exists at each one of the battlefields. And it is good to be here tonight. Also, Sharon, my wife, is with me here tonight, rather than Ben. I think most of you know Ben, who's also a camp member. He's usually here with me. But we got back from a trip to Florida about 3 o'clock this afternoon, and quite honestly, I think he's kind of dragging today. But since he is also one of our camp members, I also want to mention this. Last week in June, he'll be heading to national competition. He'll be representing the state of Tennessee again in the medical reading category of Health Occupation Students of America. He plans on entering the medical field, so Mom and Dad are going to retire and live off him for a little while, Dr. Cummings. So anyhow, Monday night we will be in Grant, Alabama. Tuesday night of next week we'll be in, we'll be in Tullahoma, Tennessee. That's Dr. Michael Bradley's home camp. And then also next Saturday we will be at the Forest Boyhood Home in Chapel Hill, Tennessee. And each one of those places we try to mention our camp, its success, and so on. So I do want to apologize while I'm not here much. At least they do hear about the Tipped Tigers in other parts of Tennessee, Alabama, and also some parts of Mississippi. What I want to talk about tonight, like I say, will be a Kentucky Civil War battlefields. Just very quickly, the Mississippi one is the one that's closest to us. Next to that is a book entitled A Rebel's Recollections, which the only reason it's there, I wrote the foreword to it. It's actually a republication of a book from the 1870s. The Kentucky book in the middle one is the one I'll be speaking on tonight. Next to it is the Tennessee Brigade. It's been out now about probably 5.5 or 6 years. And then over on the other side is Tennessee Civil War Battlefields. And what I'll try to do tonight is talk about Kentucky a little bit in relation to the other two states that are obviously a lot more familiar to us. And like I say, I apologize if I stammer, if I look at my notes some, because this is the first time, other than trying it on the way down here, actually speaking about the Kentucky book. But many of us, just a little background, remember Tennessee, again, I haven't lost my place here, but Tennessee became the 16th state in the United States in 1796. In relation to the American Civil War, it was the last to secede, and it was also one of the northernmost southern states. And then your Civil War Sites Assessment Commission has listed 38 different battles in Tennessee that had some type of impact on the outcome of the Civil War. It's second to Virginia in battlefields, and if you count all the sites, it actually ranks first. East Tennessee, of course, pro-Union, not so for Middle Tennessee and West Tennessee. Mississippi, second state after South Carolina to secede. 16 battles, according to the Civil War Sites Assessment Commission, took place within the borders of Mississippi and had an impact on the outcome of the war. Most of those, not all of them, most of them were associated with Vicksburg or the Vicksburg campaign. Also, Mississippi would provide the Confederacy with its one and only president. And again, I think most of us are familiar with that. Now, Kentucky, though, actually became the 15th state in the United States. It was one of the border states during the American Civil War. Remember, there were 5 of them, and these states were not against slavery, but they stayed in the Union as well. General populace, though, of Kentucky, more so than in Tennessee, was actually divided over the issue of slavery. And even politically, think about the whole fact of secession and how it was clear there. Because both Abraham Lincoln, the President of the United States, and Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederate States of America, were born in the state of Kentucky. Now, I'm sure that most of you probably knew that. That's a little bit of how the state's divisions basically originated, if you will. And even with the arrival of war, the governor of Kentucky at that time, a gentleman by the name of Beriah Magoffin, wouldn't commit his state to either side. He wanted it to remain neutral. And basically that's how I started out the entire book, is talking about neutrality as something I think most of us, we try not to take sides on things too strongly oftentimes, and Kentuckians tried to remain neutral. It didn't work out. Even though they tried to remain neutral, 13 battles took place within Kentucky that again were determined by the quote-unquote authorities to have had some type of impact on the outcome of the war. And I actually included another one, and we'll mention that a little bit later. It's kind of like when I was doing Mississippi, I included Holly Springs, even though they said it didn't have an impact on the outcome of the war. But when we get to Sacramento, Kentucky, it was the first battle for a young Confederate cavalry officer by the name of Nathan Bedford Forrest. And by being a fan of his, I wanted to include that in there. There are several state parks. There are a few privately owned battlefields in the state of Kentucky. Quick guess, how many national military parks within the borders of Kentucky? Anybody? Zero. Kentucky has no, good job, buddy. Kentucky has no national military parks. Perryville State Park. Think about that, we'll get there in a minute. In this book, what I did again was to conduct an overview of those 13 battles. Am I going too fast or too loud, Mom? I've got her up front because I said I don't want to mess up. There are approximately 100 photographs, period and modern. And if any of you are familiar with Blue and Gray magazine, Dave Roth, the publisher of it, he did the maps for it. And I think I told y'all before, he does a great job. But about $100 a map, he'll do you a good map. In chronological order, Barberville, that was the first battle of any size within the Kentucky borders. On September the 18th, 1861, Confederate cavalry and a group of individuals known as the Home Guard fought at a small bridge there within sight of the town of Barberville. Very few casualties. In fact, according to Confederate General Felix Zollicoffer, only one Confederate was actually killed at Barberville. But a Confederate paper actually reported said the charge was made and the enemy was completely routed. Also in Barberville, there's a small park. You can see headstones for both the one Confederate as well as the few members of the Home Guard who was killed. There's a problem though in Barberville. They don't know exactly where the bridge was where the battle was fought. Period maps did not get passed down to various generations. Very little has been found in as far as the art of some of us like to participate in metal detecting. It's just not much that's been discovered in that area. And then on October 24th, 1861, Wildcat Mountain. Now this is very well maintained, thoroughly interpreted battlefield. Rifle pits, trenches are all still available. Absolutely beautiful scenery. Even in the rain, when I was walking around up there, it's a beautiful place to see. Walking trails, interpretive panels. One Confederate lieutenant said of the battle, he said, the mountainside seemed to be, excuse me for saying this right after we ate, vomiting fire. And after that, we have Ivy Mountain, November 8th, 1861. You would think if you went to a place called Ivy Mountain, you could see a mountain. It's kind of like going to Champion Hills in Mississippi and not seeing the hills. Well, Ivy Mountain has been cut in two to basically make a safer passageway through the mountain. All that's there is one little obelisk and a pair of markers. Other than that, everything is gone in Ivy Mountain. And I know a lot of people think, why does he spend this much time talking about preservation? Well, guys and ladies, I'm going to tell you, that's what most of us are doing. We're trying to preserve in some way our heritage. And I'll tell you this, kids today, to get them interested in history, and I can tell you I see them every day, and I see adults. I teach for Jackson State, I taught for University of Memphis this past semester. A lot of people don't have a clue what's going on. And if we don't become more active and set aside some of these places that they can visit, I don't know how many of you went to the deal at Shiloh, unbelievable. And when they had the grand illumination, my wife, who I love dearly, and half of, well, no, I'll back up, 99% of what I've accomplished is because of her. And she absolutely bragged about how beautiful that was. But a lot of people have no idea about what our past is about, and if we don't become more active in setting aside these places, the biggest honor that I've gotten through all of this was the Ragland Award that we got during the sesquicentennial at Shiloh, because it was like, okay, you've done a lot to help preserve these battlefields. In Kentucky, a lot of work to be done. Mississippi, a lot of work to be done. Tennessee, a lot of work to be done. Battle in December of 1861 called Rowlett Station. A Confederate veteran wrote of the battle there. He said, I never saw men fall as they did here. That man, by the way, later fought July 1st through 3rd in a little place called Gettysburg. And I don't know where he was, but when he compared it to Rowlett Station, he said Rowlett Station, for him personally, had a bigger impact. The previous month, which would have been November of 1861, 1,000 Texas Rangers were in the area of Rowlett Station. Only 78 of them were able to report to roll call that day. There was a massive outbreak of measles, and some of them were recovering from measles when they fought there at Rowlett Station. Today, though, there's a Texas memorial on the battlefield, and the oldest Civil War monument is nearby. Otherwise, there's just one sign to interpret the battle. And then Sacramento, we mentioned it earlier, Sacramento, Kentucky, December the 28th, 1861. Greatest day in history, December 28th, but not 1861. This was the first battle of the war for a Confederate cavalry officer, again, by the name of Nathan Bedford Forrest. It was also a major victory for him. Here, he had actually been warned of the Federals when a young lady, who he described as a beautiful young Kentucky belle, rode up to him on a horse and said, "The men in blue are ahead," and he was prepared. Here, Forrest, also his ferocity in battle became almost legendary in his first encounter, because by himself, he defeated 3 Federal cavalrymen. He captured one of them. You know what happened to the other 2? He had a sword, that's all I'm going to say. All right, the battlefield there, very well preserved. A reenactment takes place there every year. It's great to go there. However, the interpretive signs are a lot like if you go to Chattanooga, Tennessee, and there's nowhere to pull over to the side of the road when you're going up Lookout Mountain. It's hard to read them. And in fact, to read one of them, we parked in a Dollar General parking lot across the road. And then you stand on the edge of the highway, and there's a ditch about as far as I am from the edge of the stage. So there's been a lot of stuff done there, but again, there's a lot to be done. Middle Creek, January the 10th of 1862. This was a huge Federal victory. And in fact, the commanding officer of the Union troops at that day was a colonel by the name of James Garfield. In a few months, James Garfield became brigadier general for his actions. 19 years later, he became president of the United States. And of course, he was assassinated early in his term. The battlefield there, very well preserved, extremely well maintained. Visitors can walk along either a Union trail and see the Union side of the battle, if you will, or a Confederate trail. I walked them both, so I'll be politically correct, okay? Excellent series of kiosks, describe the battle there very well, the characters who fought. I mean, like I said, a lot of the veterans who were there, the very well documented battle there. Sadly, though, the field that has been preserved is at a crossroads, literally. And again, it's hard to find much of the area to park. Once you can get your car off the road, it's pretty easy to visit the battlefield. Major safety issue, not only in parking, but also exiting your vehicle. The victory was so decisive there that for the Federals that one of the officers said, 3 discharges of our cannon and the enemy simply fled. One of the Confederate deaths there, and I have a photograph of this gentleman in the book, was a 29-year-old private by the name of Stanford Lee Jesse. 29 years old. He left behind a wife and 5 children. His wife never received a pension. In fact, she died penniless herself. Mill Springs, January the 19th, 1862. A Federal officer said that the field there was a place of carnage and death. This battle is known by a total of 11 names. And in fact, that's considered to be a record. I mean, you think, for example, you've got Shiloh, Pittsburgh Landing. You can say Murfreesboro, Stones River. You know, many of them have different names. But that particular battlefield is known by 11 different names. And they say that's a record as far as Civil War battles. One of the 150 Confederates killed there was Felix Zollicoffer, who I mentioned earlier, a Tennessee newspaperman as well as a politician. Fabulous visitor center, locally owned. It's not any type of federal dollars going in there at all. Great driving tour, walking trails, plenty of interpretive signs, well-kept cemetery, and you can actually buy a piece of the original Zolli tree, as they called it, which was planted to mark the spot where Zollicoffer was killed. Zollicoffer had poor eyesight. I know Marty mentioned that earlier. I have my friends here with me tonight. And he had his glasses taken off because it was a misty rain. He rode right into the middle of a group of Union cavalrymen. He started talking, and he realized where he was, and as he started riding away, of course, they shot and killed him. Richmond, Kentucky, 7 months after the battle we just mentioned, on August 29th and 30th of 1862. A Confederate colonel by the name of Benjamin Hill said, "The deadliest fire was poured into our ranks, but we did not falter." And then he used a few other choice words. Today, most of this battlefield, which was the site of Federal casualties, of 225 killed, 1,073 wounded, and over 4,000 captured, along with 148 U.S. wagons, is on the U.S. Army base. By the way, the Confederate casualties, total, just a little over 100. Let's compare that to the numbers that we just gave. However, one of the most significant Confederate casualties was a young Confederate general by the name of Patrick Cleburne. Cleburne was talking to another officer, and a bullet went into his open mouth, knocked out some of his teeth. Now, of course, most of us are aware of the fact that he recovered. He would die in November of 1864 at Franklin, Tennessee. Outstanding battlefield driving tour, also a visitor center, I say, that borders that military base. Then we have the battlefield of Munfordville, Kentucky, also known as the Battle of the Bridge. The bridge spans the Green River And the bridge that was fought for almost 150 years ago is still used to this day. Problem is, it's on private property, as is most of the battlefield, separated by a hog wire from what you can get on. But the trails that you can walk are just dirt and grass, or like the days that we were there, mud and muddy grass. So I mean, as far as properly maintained or preserved, it is not. A Mississippi soldier said at the Battle of Munfordville that all at once the carnage began. He talks about his friends falling one after another. Poor interpretation of the battle. Not a lot there. It actually, when you visit it, I mean, it leaves a lot to the imagination. I'll say what is well preserved is not very well maintained. And then Perryville, October the 8th, 1862. The largest battle in the state and also one of the major state parks. There, similar to what we see at Carnton and Franklin, Tennessee, there's a huge Confederate cemetery. And it was started by a man who was a local farmer, and there were so many Confederates killed on his farm, which was ground zero at that particular Battle of Perryville, and he started rounding up these young men in gray and burying them, just like we see with the Widow of the South and so on at Carnton. I say if you're familiar with that story. Excellent interpretation of the battlefield today. Again, a little dated, kind of like if you go to Fort Donaldson, Tennessee, and you see the dated visitor center. You know, they're not all like Corinth. They're not all like Mill Springs. Some of these places need some modernization so that some of our younger folks will get a little more out of it. Well preserved, highly accessible field, a little strenuous for an old man like me. Some of them are kind of tough to walk. Sorry about that, Joe. Also, some of the period structures like the bottom house do still exist, about 750 acres in the park. And then the major participants in that battle, sorry folks from Mississippi, but were Tennesseans, led by officers like Maney, Donaldson, and Stewart. In fact, Brigadier General Daniel Donaldson said, "We committed sad havoc in killing and wounding large numbers of the blue-clad, jerks, basically." All right, there are mixed results in the 8 towns that are represented in Morgan's Christmas raid. Now, most of you are familiar with John Hunt Morgan, and John Hunt Morgan is actually on the cover of the Kentucky book. I wanted Forrest, but I'm also a John Paul Strain fan. And John Paul Strain does not have any pictures or paintings, of Forrest in Kentucky, so therefore I went with John Hunt Morgan. Morgan was successful in trying to take over some of the area railroads, running the federal supply base. He made it impassable for 2 months, according to his report. And again, like I say, if you get a chance to look at it, I think you'll find that artwork as good as any that John Paul Strain's done. I think he's tremendous. Paducah, Kentucky. This moves all the way to March of 1864. Another little bit of action for Nathan Bedford Forrest. One of Forrest's men wrote, "The enemy opened up on us with the most terrible volley." Now, I know and you know that Forrest is kind of a controversial figure, but you would think one of his major battles, the battlefield would be well preserved. I'll tell you a little bit what went on there. Where his headquarters were located. Today, there's an old abandoned building, windows broken out, vandals throwing rocks and so on, just like what you're talking about with the sign. The site of Fort Anderson, which was the object of his attack, a convention center sits where Fort Anderson was today. By the way, the convention center is no longer used. So it again is a haven for crime and so on in the area of Paducah. However, some of the area's homes and churches that were used for hospitals, you can still see those. But as far as the battlefield proper, not so. The last major battle in Kentucky was a town by the name of Cynthiana. In fact, John Hunt Morgan fought there twice, but the major one took place June 11th and 12th of 1864. The main thing that exists there today is the courthouse. Just like, some of us have courthouses that were around back during the American Civil War. The Confederate sharpshooters stood on some of the in some of the upper rooms of the courthouse, fired down upon the advancing Union troops. But the depot, which was the scene of some of the major fighting, not even interpreted, not even noted on any of the maps there. Battle Grove Cemetery, which is the oldest Civil War Confederate cemetery in Kentucky, is not even noted on the battle tour guide. So as you can see, Kentucky, just like for those of you who remember what we talked about on Tennessee, just like if you remember what we talked about with Mississippi, extremely mixed results. And again, I know we all talk about let's preserve this, let's preserve that, but guys and ladies, the time is now. And I think you can tell from what a lot of different federal legislation is done. I know Bobby Joe and I were talking a few minutes ago, even in our county, they've cut back teachers because of money problems. We've never laid off teachers in our county before. So, I mean, we've got a major battle to launch, to preserve these things for future generations. And I'll be quite honest, I don't think there's anybody to blame but ourselves for our younger people not understanding a lot of what's going on. Because we are their teachers, and they follow us by example. And I know you've got the internet, you've got the History Channel. They were talking about how many people watched Hatfield and McCoy. It's like, I forget how many millions of people watched that. Wouldn't it be good if they could present again the old North and South that was on back in the late 70s and so on? You know, if they could do that again, I wonder if we'd have that type of representation among viewers today. I apologize if I came across as totally boring. But I know I say to a lot of people, when you start talking about things like preservation, you're thinking, okay, I don't want to put money into that, and I understand that. But there are some very active agencies in Kentucky, most of them local groups, historical associations, several SCV camps, but not many in Kentucky. I mean, you don't see the numbers in Kentucky like you do in Mississippi and in Tennessee. And guys and ladies, I know I said we don't go many places, but a lot of places we speak, if there are 12 or 15 people there, they talk about that being a heavy turnout. And of course, I know tonight when we speak, we're lighter than we usually are, but I mean, it's interesting, I say to me, that a lot of people, they know something needs to be done, but actually doing it's going to take some work. And I apologize for stammering around here. Questions, I will be glad to try to answer them if you have any questions. If I need to hit the other 2 or 3 very quickly, I'll be glad to whatever you may do on those. I say I apologize. I promise I'm a lot better speaker than this usually. I don't know what I'm doing tonight. So.
We talked about Paducah a little bit. I know the Lloyd Tillman house, your Lloyd Tillman is there, and there was like a battle right in town there.
Right, and there's a yellow house just next to his. I can't remember the gentleman's name. I've got a picture of the house in there, and he was killed basically in his yard. Again, the parallels between Kentucky with Tennessee and Mississippi. You know, we talk about Todd Carter being found mortally wounded in the yard of his house there in Franklin. He's carried to the room where he was born, and he dies in that same room. Same thing happens in the Battle of Paducah, Kentucky. You have Lloyd Tillman house, of course, he's killed at Champion Hill. I mean, there's a lot of connections in those states. There really is.
Nothing on Elkhorn City?
No, sir. No, sir. We had to stop somewhere, and that's, you know, it's kind of like, I had a man, when I was speaking at Union City, the SCV camp up there, he got mad because I didn't include Union City. You know, I didn't include Moscow, Tennessee. We had to stop somewhere. I did kind of stretch and get it. Some of them, like Holly Springs, I thought you had to have it. You know. Anytime you can mess up Grant's plans for Vicksburg, I think you need to talk about that. Yes, sir.
Could you call out the names of those battles again?
Yes, sir. Sure. I'll read them in chronological order. We had Barberville, Wildcat Mountain, Ivy Mountain, ivy like poison ivy. Rowlett's Station, it's ROWLETT''S. Sacramento.
How many men did Forrest have with him at that?
If I remember right, buddy, it was around 1,200, I think, but don't hold me to that. Because that was, you know, it seemed like every time he would get a pretty good group built up, he would get a promotion and lose the ones he had built up. And I think it was about 1,200, but don't hold me to that. I could easily be wrong. Middle Creek, Mill Springs,